Hello, it's Dr. Stephanie, your favorite life coach and physician. And I'm just checking in. How you doing? Just checking in with everybody. How are you doing? It's been a stressful period of time to be in the 92%. I'm sure a lot of us can agree on that. And I just wanted to check in with you on how you're doing with not just managing your stress, but getting rid of stress. So I'm gonna sip my tea, and just have a little conversation about chronic stress, because there is chronic stress that we experience as Black women that comes from discrimination or racism and sexism. And that stress is affecting us greatly. It's causing us to age faster than we normally would. And they've done studies that show that the chronic stress from sexism and racism is about 4 times higher. Like if you interview Black women, it's 4 times higher amount of stress, which is attributed to sexism and racism than the average person experiences stress, because we all experience stress. And chronic stress is when it's not just a short-lived experience, but it's over a long period of time, which, as we know as Black women, dealing with racism and sexism is a chronic source of stress. So what do we do? What do we do if we know that it's increases our chances to get diabetes, it's increasing our blood pressure, it's taking years off our lives, and it's aging us, I know we say Black don't crack, but we still don't want to take any years off of our lives. So what do we do with that? I am passionate about not only just managing stress, but actually eradicating stress, because I think that it is very important for us as Black women to be able to thrive, right? We need to be able to thrive in the situation that we're in. And the other thing I thought was really interesting is that if you think about racism and sexism, which one of those impacts us more? And I bet, I was surprised by the answer, but it's sexism, which, if you think about it, is not that surprising, because some of our ancestors, like Shirley Chisholm, got it right. She had a quote that says, "Of the two handicaps, being Black is much less of a drawback than being female." Whew. So basically, we are operating under a double whammy that leads to chronic stress. But there are ways for us to get rid of the chronic stress that we're dealing with from racism and sexism. And that's really what I want to talk about this month. I want to talk about how we get rid of that chronic stress, in addition to learning how to sip our coffee or sip our tea and be unbothered, as I know a lot of us have learned how to do, to take those capes off and be as unbothered as possible. There are a lot of other things that we can do to get rid of chronic stress. And one of them that I think is not talked about enough, that I hadn't thought about enough, is to really think about spiritual bypassing. Spiritual bypassing. And what is that? I know I didn't know what it was until I got a little bit curious. I saw a lot of people that I respected talking about spiritual bypassing. But that's when we experience something that's really difficult, that's really painful, and our first response is to say a platitude like, "Everything works out for the good," or "God's got us," or "God wouldn't bring us here to leave us." And although those things may be true, depending on your faith and your belief system, when you're actually in a period of stress or a period of pain, it's not really that helpful, because what it does is it bypasses the process that we need to go through in order to truly heal. And so a lot of us may be walking around only partially healed because we never allowed ourselves to go through the process of being fully healed because we just bypassed it. And one of our favorite ways to do that is with spiritual bypassing. So the next time you are quick to say to yourself, God's going to work it out, or it's all for the best, or it's all working together, just take a moment and ask yourself, have I fully processed the emotions that I'm really feeling? Because if I'm angry, I have a right to be angry. There are legitimate things for me to be angry about. And let me take a moment to sit in that anger and ask that anger a couple of questions like, why are you here? And what can I do about you? Because anger is not an unuseful emotion. It actually motivates us to take some sort of action. If we're sad, allow ourselves to sit in that sadness. And I know it's uncomfortable to sit in sadness. I've been sitting in sadness for a few weeks now, and it is not comfortable. And sometimes it feels really dark. But eventually, as I allowed myself to sit in that sadness, each day I woke up with a glimpse of a little bit more light. But I know that if I had pushed it aside, it would have just come back up again. And if I had used spiritual bypassing to get rid of the sadness prematurely, that I really would not have allowed myself to feel what I needed to feel. I needed to feel sad because I was sad. And eventually, the sadness did pass. So I would encourage you to learn a little bit more about spiritual bypassing. The formal definition is the tendency to use spiritual ideas and practices to sidestep or avoid facing unresolved emotional issues, psychological wounds, and unfinished developmental tasks. And it doesn't have to be spiritual, Christian theology that you use. It can be other spiritual, whether it's Buddhism, whether it's just toxic optimism or toxic positivity. So beware of spiritual bypassing as we're dealing with the effects of chronic stress that comes from sexism and racism. So throughout this month, I'm going to share a lot about chronic stress that comes from sexism and racism, and how we can process this and still thrive and still have joy in our lives and still be excited and happy to be a Black woman, right? One of the things that keeps me in awe about the 92% is that, wow, there's no other demographic that showed up with the level of solidarity that we did. That means that we are so powerful and so magical. And how can we harness that power and that manage to move en masse towards something that gives us the freedom that we desire, okay? And so releasing the shackles of the stress that we get from racism and sexism will help us to harness that power. Doesn't mean racism and sexism doesn't exist, and I believe it's going to exist throughout my lifetime, but it does mean we do not have to be handicapped by the chronic stress that it causes in our lives. So stay tuned this month and take care of yourselves. Sip your coffee, sip your tea. Take care.